Welcome back to the class, everyone. Every couple months, we take some time to talk about the 40 best Grand Arena teams in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. One of the glaring issues, though, every single time we do that, is that we are consistently only talking about 5v5. And despite the fact that we get comments like these, we still haven't talked about 3v3. So now is the time to talk about what are the 40 best Grand Arena teams for 3v3, excluding Galactic Legends. So the setup for this is going to be very similar to that of how we do the 5v5 version, where we are going to take every team, or the 40 best teams for 3v3, and put them into different tiers. And again, the way this functions is if a team is on top of another team, that doesn't mean it's like in first place and second place. If they're all in the same category, we're assuming they're all roughly around the same power level. And then generally, S tier teams will be better than A tier teams, A tier teams will be better than B tier teams, and B tier teams will be better than C tier teams. And lastly, the reason why we're not really talking about Galactic Legends is because not everyone has them, and then even if you do, you kind of assume that they're already the best, and there's not a whole lot to talk about. So how this is going to work is we're going to start off with the S tier, and one of the main things that defines the S tier is the fact that they are going to consistently be able to beat Galactic Legends or other high-level targets out there. And then when we move down the list, one of the key factors of the A tier is that they can beat the S tier. And one of the key factors about the B tier is they can beat the A tier. And that's really just kind of how this whole thing goes. That's the methodology behind it. So starting off, we're going to talk about Starkiller, a perfect example of what an S tier team is. With this exact comp, you can beat Rey fairly reliably, assuming the enemy team doesn't have any type of data crunch shenanigan, which I realize a lot of that is going around right now. But if they don't, he works just fine, assuming you have everything dialed in, with Mara Jade to have really fast mods, Starkiller himself to have the unique Omicron, and then as well just have everyone up to the relic level they should be to be able to take out a Rey of similar relic levels. Starkiller has the tools necessary to be able to wipe off the crit avoidance that they have so that you can crit, get rid of the inspired, and ultimately take down the team, bring down the ship, and all that other good stuff. Next up is going to be the Inquisitorius team. Very strong team, arguably stronger in 3v3 than it is in 5v5. Similar to 5v5, you'll be able to take out JML and JMK, and it'll be glorious. Different than 5v5 is if you place this team on defense, the Phoenix counter doesn't really exist because you don't have enough allies attacking out of turn, generating more purge and generating more turn meter, so that counter kind of falls flat entirely, meaning if you want to put this team on defense and use it that way, your enemy is going to have to pull out some larger counters like Traya Savage to be able to take it down reliably, or even a larger counter like a Galactic Legend to be able to beat it. Next up is going to be Sith Empire, a team that has not been out that long, but at the same time also aged very well. Overall, defensively, it's not doing as good as it done previously, just because Cal Kestis is finally back in the game, and he's one of the teams that makes it one of the characters that makes it a lot easier to counter this. That being said, the offensive viability for this team has recently just been through the roof. A lot of the new characters or teams or datacrons or whatever that are coming into the game are still consistently being beat by Darth Malgus. For me, he's been consistently a counter actually to the Inquisitorius team that we talked about just now, as well as the DTMG with the super datacron and all the right characters and everything like that. So good team. Has fallen a little bit on defense, but is still very, very good on offense. Next up is going to be the Seer Malicos team, a team that's probably slightly worse in 3v3 compared to 5v5, but still very good overall. If you're going to put it on defense, you're going to want to use this comp. Otherwise, it's actually super susceptible to being beat by Gidme, a very cheap counter. If you're using an offense and trying to beat Rey with it, you're just going to want to trade out our good friend Kylo Ren en masse for Cal Kestis. Really kind of an overall good trade because crew can do some other fun things in some other teams. Next up is going to be Darth Traya and Savage. And this really is a testament to how good these characters are, because if we look at the rest of the characters that are on this list, they're all like conquest characters or recent legendaries, and require several Omicrons, which I guess the Treya team does require several Omicrons too. But still, the fact that it can kind of hang out here and beat a lot of the other top level teams, it can beat JML, it can beat JMK when they don't have Cat present, and it can also beat a lot of the other teams that are in the circle. We just talked about how they're one of the few counters out there to the Inquisitorius, with Phoenix being out. They work okay against Seer Malicos, Datacron's pending, and stuff like that. Next up is going to be Bo Mandalore, a character and team that I don't have, but I've looked at the stats for it. Absolutely disgusting on defense, actually. You really don't know what's going to go on with it, and part of that does have to do with the current Datacron that's out there. But even without the Datacron, we have some data from it before that even came into the game. It still slaughters Lord Vader for a very high win rate of 90%, squashing a previous counter of Fennec who was sitting at like 19 or something like that. So overall, amazing character, really fits the criteria for being able to beat Galactic Legends. And speaking of broken, here's Bane. Use him on offense, pick a team that isn't Jabba or JMK, and win. I mean, that's pretty much all this comes down to. I don't think that he's going to be worse in 3v3. The only thing that does make me think that just slightly, just itty bit, is he gets more damage based on each buff dispelled, and if there's less enemies, he'll probably be displaying less buffs. I think he's still going to be fine, though. I think he's still going to slaughter most of the younglings out there, or those that appear to be younglings due to the fact that he is Darth Bane. So that's the very top level, best teams in the game. Again, this is more from a roster building perspective, so it's going to take you a while to build up to them. Next up are going to be the A-tier teams. Still very good, not quite doing everything that the S-tier are doing, and typically their entry level is a lot lower. First up is going to be Aphra. I like Aphra quite a bit. She does lose her Datacron now, so her viability is going to fall a little bit, but overall still a great team. And one of the big things that's important for her, and I want to mention this, is she cleans up pretty much every single Galactic Legend, assuming the Galactic Legend alone. The reason why this is important, because in 3v3, it is a pain in the butt to clean up a Galactic Legend. In 5v5, it's not all that hard because you have 5 different characters being leveraged against their one. In 3v3, you don't get to have all the tools or the turn meter mechanics or the control that you would have in 5v5, and some of them are just a huge pain in the butt to clean up. Aphra that's where really she comes in and cleans up a lot of those harder teams. Next up is going to be General Skywalker, an overall good team within itself. We're using this comp right now just because both Rex as well as 5 are better off kind of used with Commander Rex, depending on how your roster split is. If you do want to use this to clean up Rey, you're going to want to swap out Echo for 5s. I do really like ARC Trooper here just because Rex doesn't give all that much to the team when you're going against Rey, at least when you're trying to clean up Rey. But even then, this team is kind of a pain to deal with in 3v3 because the enemy player is not going to have CLS like they would in 5v5, who can quite handily take out General Skywalker, whereas in 3, CLS really does struggle in that regard. Next up is going to be Tuskens, and yes, Tuskens are an A-tier ranked team when it comes to 3v3. And this is really in 2 parts. It's one part because Tusken Chieftain and Warrior are very good, and also partially because Tusken Raiders Omicron is a pain to deal with. If you don't have one or the other, Tuskens are fairly manageable. You can use Wampa for just the Tusken Raider Omicron because you can get the 2 kills at the same time, or maybe taking something with perma-kills like Django, or for just these 2, you can use something cheaper like Gidme because you can go right to him because there's no tank. When you combine the 2 together, it's not fun. And in fact, I almost always specifically save General Skywalker to go against this because they're not that fun to go against. I realize AdRad works if they don't have the Raider Omicron, but again, this is kind of talking about the best version of the team. Next up is going to be the Fennec Bam Grief team, a team that we knocked on Fennec earlier. For record, I guess those statistics we were talking about was for 5v5. This being for 3v3, this counter actually has a lot more legs against Lord Vader, not just cleaning up, but taking it out for the one shot. The big caveat is if they use the very specific Lord Vader comp of Maul and Thrawn, this right here has a ton of issues, because if they fracture Beskar Armor Mando and then Maul can just blow up Fennec, the whole thing ends instantly. And even if they fracture Fennec, it's still not fun because he gets to loop back around to his fractures quite a bit. At any rate, if they don't use that comp, they use another one. This one has a pretty good shot at taking out, and you can even swap out Shiny Mando for Brown Mando if they don't have Maul on the team, so you can immediately destroy one of the tanks or whatever is sitting there. Next up is going to be the Fin Zori team. Gosh, I hate this team. I hate this team so much. Everybody places on defense, and granted, we have more tools now to deal with it than when it first came out, but gosh, this is a pain in the butt. Every single one of them has cleanses, and they cleanse each other, and then they reduce their cooldowns, and they always have a cleanse again. The only way to stun all three, or to really have any stun land on them ever, is to take in Giant Luke and stun all three at the same time so they can't cleanse each other. Super annoying. Cooldowns, turn meter, they have like all the tools. There are counters, they do exist. That's why it's not in the higher tier, but at the same time, so annoying. Next up is going to be Maul, Gar Saxon, as well as Imperial Super Commando. A really tricky team. It is beatable. I've seen it quite a bit on defense recently. And if you take in, again, a very exact counter of, let's say, Jedi Knight Revan, Jedi Knight Luke, and Grandmaster Yoda, immediately mark Maul, dispel his frenzy or whatever, get him down, kill him, and then be very careful about not letting Imperial Super Commando counter you. You beat it just fine, one shot, walk away. The issue is, if you don't use that, or something very similar to that, this team is not fun to go against. The amount of true damage these two guys get, even at a lower relic level, even with bad mods, is disgusting. If you let them go, they will just rip through some bigger teams. One of that, we didn't even have Maul lead, but one of the things that we did last 3v3 season was we actually used Gar-led Imperial Super Commando with Piet and killed half of a JMK team, including with Cat. It was kind of nuts. Anyways, very good overall team. Next up is going to be Padme, Cat, GK, a team that almost nobody is going to see, because if you have Cat, you probably are putting with JMK. I realize there's some outliers, so I guess this part is kind of for you guys. This team is a really big pain in the butt to deal with on defense. Padme herself is quite easy to beat, but when you throw in Commander Ahsoka Tano in there, you ruin a lot of the counters that would otherwise work, including a Malak solo, which would be a very cheap counter, now just completely gone because of that. Can also be used on offense in some fun ways to, I think, kill General Skywalker, because the Annihilate will just, annihilate him quite well. Next up is going to be the Malgus Killer, and there are other comps that can work for this. This is not the end-all be-all for this. This is just the one that I happen to use. I really like it because Bash the Shan is a fairly cheap leadership compared to Jedi Knight Revan or Jedi Knight Luke, who also work. And then I get to utilize my R8 Plo Koon that was mostly for ships, but at the same time, due to Bast's lead, he is going to start taunting, which means that my Jedi Knight Cal Kestis doesn't have to take the big hit from Malgus right out the gate, and this typically works just fine. Not the only way to do it. You can use Jedi Knight Luke, you can use Jedi Knight Revan, you can use Hoda. Cal is necessary. Next up is going to be a counter that most people haven't heard of because it's quite old and almost nobody's leaving SLKR on defense, but this does beat SLKR quite well, and it can beat some of the other teams that we just talked about, like Maul, or use Jedi Knight Revan, Jedi Knight Luke, and the armor. And really, the whole thing here revolves around tricking SLKR into thinking he can crit characters he can't. You put 3 stacks of Beskar onto Jedi Knight Revan, he can't be crit, and SLKR will hard focus him just because that's the way he's wired for whatever reason. And what will happen is Jedi Knight Revan's mastery will go down into the ground, he won't die, and then Jedi Knight Luke just kind of has all the tools to be able to kill all of SLKR's team between his damage and buffs and everything else that he does. So overall, old counter, but still checks out. Next up is going to be Dark Trooper Moff Gideon. Really like this team on defense. It does get beat by Adrad without the Datacron, so that kind of stinks. But at the same time, Adrad is a counter to several, if not every, pure Empire team that we currently have out there, except Lord Vader. So if you can draw Adrad out with Iden in the front wall, you're pretty much demanding that your opponent having to use something really strong like Malgus against this in the back wall. I realize this is a fairly expensive comp, but this is one of the things that's keeping it or propping it up to be better. One thing that I should mention that I think a lot of people will get benefit from, and we've already mentioned a few times, is if you don't like this, you just take Gideon, you plug him into the Padme team, you put Cat with JMK, because you probably have that, and then you throw in like Aylar, Shock, or someone who's a support, and you can make a really fun team that as long as Gideon goes first, you can just delete characters that aren't immune to max health damage. So another option out there that you can use. And one last thing that we want to say about the A tiers, we're pretty much using all of our Jedi wrapped up into these 2 teams, and while we don't have it listed out, this does give you the opportunity to make a fun kind of Kelleron, Beck, Grandmaster Yoda, and Mace team, which I felt like I had to say that because those are 3 really good characters who you're not going to see on this list at all, and they can probably work just fine together. Next up is going to be the B tier, less than the A tier, just kind of how that works. First up, we have Iden Versio. Overall, pretty great team still. Better in 5v5 because there's typically more assists when there's more characters, and they get to benefit from that more. But still, in 3v3, as long as you have them fully geared up and relict and whatnot, they'll still beat CLS, they'll still beat Mon Mothma. They will just struggle with that more so at a lower level than they would in 5v5, where they still just kind of win. Next up is going to be Adrad. We've already talked about why this team is super cool. You don't need to have K2 in here. You can use Cassian. I like K2. It's fine. beats all the Empire teams. We talked about it a lot. We have CLS here, a team that falls a little bit in overall viability from 5v5 to 3v3, but still good. Gets beat by Iden. It actually has several counters now, just because it was a staple in defense for the longest time. But you can still find some fun uses for it. I know some people like to use it in offense versus Star Killer. I looked at the win rates on that. I don't really like them, so there's might be something that I'm missing overall in how that's done. But still, not a bad team. Bad Batch, fairly reliable for a lot of the teams that you might face, whether they be Separatist or Droid, like Sortie or Newt Lead or whatever it is. They'll kind of just clobber them. Don't have that high of a win rate versus higher level teams, but still something that you will almost always find something to use against them. Next up is going to be this weird Han Chew team that I like to use. You don't have to use Hondo as lead by any stretch of the imagination. Wedge is fine. I guess Rolo is probably fine, or Princess Leia. Really, any character in the leadership. I've seen Thrawn before. So I'd rather not use CLS just because he can be in his own team. But really, Han and Chew are just going to elevate this team to the next level, allowing them to kill a lot of the other B teams out there. The one thing I do like about Hondo in there is you have a stupid amount of control, because not only can Han stun someone right out the gate, Hondo will lock someone up right out the gate. So as long as you leave what other third character is there just kind of hanging out, you probably are fine, and then you get the stacks going. It's great. Next up is going to be the Qui-Gon Jinn team. Overall, still a pain in the butt. We keep getting Jedi and Galactic Republic Crons. So really keeping this team in all functionality. And it's harder to juggle in 3v3 than it is in 5v5. In 5v5, you take Bad Batch against it. You've got like all these extra stuns and turn meter reduction. And 3v3, you don't have that as much. So the odds or the chances that this just go completely haywire and Jedi Anakin nukes you are a lot higher. And I do like Cameron there because while he can taunt, he also boosts Jedi Anakin's damage because he adds speed to the team, and Qui-Gon Jinn turns that speed into offense, and it's overall just glorious. Next up is going to be the direct counter to that comp, and that is going to be Newt Jango B1. And the reason why is because they can take pretty much any onslaught in the beginning and then start to gain control after that. The idea here is that both Newt and Jango can revive, and Jango actually starts in damage immunity. And then B1 doesn't really care about how much damage you deal. He's more so concerned about how many times he gets hit. So a lot of times what will happen is they'll actually open up on Jango and throw a bunch of hits on him, even with damage immunity, and you'll just overtake them with both extortion. You can do this fun thing where you burn everyone and you put healing immunity on Jedi Anakin, you kill Qui-Gon, and then Jedi Anakin actually keels over because he was burned and had healing immunity. It's pretty cool. Next up is going to be the Imperial Troopers, another team that's kind of fallen a little bit overall in 3v3 viability just because they like the turn meter of having 5 troopers. Still fun. They can still beat some stuff out there. Assuming they do go first, it just does become a little bit more challenging because you don't have characters like range to help close the gap between Dark Troopers, so you might need to have better mods or just go against slower teams. Next up is going to be the Mon Mothma team, a team that does do a little bit better in 3v3, purely for the same reasons when we talked about Iden Versio. You don't have as many characters attacking at a turn purely for the sake of attacking at a turn. You do have a little bit more intentionality with them. Kyle Katarn is really good overall for damage, and then Cara Dune really kind of slaps around a lot of the Empire teams, which are actually relevant counters to that, so that is very good. Next up is going to be Saw, a character we still haven't seen to his fullest extent just because he's been propped up actually for 6 months, 4 months, a long time, by Datacrons, whether it be his or Turrets, but overall it still looks to be a pain. It doesn't look like Iden counters it as well as she would like to, at least when he has his GAC Omicron. Speaking of GAC Omicrons, we have Dash here as well. Just kind of a pain in the butt team to deal with. You can counter with things like Jedi Knight Revan, or I think even Night Sisters have a pretty good handle on it. But overall, it's going to require a real team, and you can't just take it out with anything. Wampa, pretty cool overall. Still no defensive viability because that's the way he was made. But at the same time, he typically has a higher chance of beating something on offense in 3v3 because not only do you need more teams in 3v3, but in addition to that, the teams that are sitting out there on the board are less likely to have something that will stop him. One thing that was really common for a while there was to put Iden with TIE Fighter Pilot, and when you did that, you were giving her a way to get Snazzy down, which would stop Wampa, but at the same time, you could still have your Stormtrooper and your Death Trooper and whatever else needed to be there. Now, it's a lot harder to do that with Iden. Like, if you leave Iden with just Stormtrooper and TIE Fighter Pilot, sure, Wampa can't beat it, but now, like, Bam will, I guess? I don't know. Not overall, Wampa's more usable. That's kind of the point we're getting at. Weird tangent. Next up is going to be the Night Sisters. Very similar to the Dash thing we talked about before. There are solutions. They're not always simple, can be problematic. The double Rex 5s team, this team is annoying. I've been using Qui-Gon Jinn to beat it pretty consistently, and that's been great, but I have to save that counter every single time specifically for this, because the amount of recovery that both 5s and Rex get because of Captain Rex's unity, you don't even need the Omicron, by the way. We have the Omicron, it's fine, but this all getting to affect everyone before you even apply that, or where is it? Yeah. Whenever our clone trooper ally falls below 50% health, they recover 35% health and protection. Limit once per turn. They get turns all the time. Anyways, and they gain other stuff. It makes it very hard to kill. Again, there are solutions. There aren't that many though, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. And then Trench, way better than he looks, quite frankly. And that's not just because of his Datacron this time around. If you are willing to give, and this is important, if you're willing to give him Wat Tambor, you cut in half the win rates of Wampa and Bad Batch. And the really cool thing about that is when not only is it a 40 or 50% counter when they use those teams, but they will be way more tempted to do it because they've beaten Trench dozens of times, because typically people don't put Wat in with Trench. They use like Dooku and Newt Gunray or something like that, which is a far inferior comp, but anyways. And finally, we have the C tier teams. These are ones that I've almost completely moved away from, but I still kind of like them. First up is going to be Thermal City with our good friend Boba Fett. I like Boba Fett's lead. I realize it's outdated. I realize there's better leads out there for bounty hunters, but it does a lot of fun stuff before contract. Critical damage is always good. You get turn meter, you get speed for debuffed enemies. There's a lot of things in here that are hard to predict, like how many debuffs are going to land, how much speed are you going to get, which can make it good at a bare minimum at stealing banners. Overall, just a team to fill up the board with characters that aren't typically needed elsewhere. Next up is going to be General Grievous. Well, talk about a team that falls from grace from 5v5 to 3v3. This team really needs 4 characters at a bare minimum, and they just do not get it. It's hard to get full banners against it, and that's about the only nice thing I can say, because all you do is you go right after B2, you kill B2, then I guess you like mark or kill Grievous next, or you can even kill Magna Guard first. Grievous just doesn't get to stack enough health, nor does he get enough bonus turns because he only has 2 allies instead of 4, and that does really hurt him. Next up is going to be a JTR with the droids. A kind of nice combo, a team that could be used on offense. I don't like a lot of the teams that it can be because the win rates aren't overall very high, and there's some RNG factors with certain debuffs landing or not landing. But overall, it's still very much a real team. Sortie and Lobot, parenting T3M4. Fun defensive team. Not the best thing out there, but if you leave it on defense, they at least have to use a real team against it. Geonosh's pretty big staple for most accounts. Not the best team, also not the worst. They have some tricks up their sleeve. Bando with his friends here, very similar mentality. The reason why this just kind of falls so low in 3v3 again is because without other allies or really even more enemies to hit, he has a much harder time not only gaining turn meter from that, but also getting up to 20 stacks of Whistling Birds is very challenging in 3v3s. If you put Dash in there, you can get a lot closer, but still, like, Dash is kind of fine doing his own thing. The rest of the bounty hunters that we haven't already used in better comps, we can just now throw in here. I do kind of like this a little bit because what this allows you to do is pretty much get contract against any timeout team, because not only do you have characters that can ignore taunt, but Boba Fett Scion of Django actually has consistent AoEs that it can use pretty much every single turn that actually also have damage over time, which will then heal the team. So not the best team in the world, but for any of those pesky timeout teams out there that just refuse to die, this will handle it, because not only will you get contract, but the Mandalorian will then just annihilate someone. The Hux team with First Order TIE Pilot, I still kind of like this team. If you're going up against a team that you're faster than, which isn't that hard with First Order TIE Pilot, and they don't have a pre-taunt, you can just kill one of the characters, the attacker, the supporter, the whoever, right off the rip, and that can be pretty fun sometimes. Doesn't work every time. If they're too tanky, then you obviously lose, but still, it's out there. Next up is going to be this damage control tank team, and this is pretty much just Malak solo plus. I like Darth Vader in there because he kind of solves the problem of Darth Malak not having an AoE, and Darth Vader can also stack up his dots relentlessly. Grand Admiral Thrawn to help control things, hopefully while Malak is taunting at the same time. And then lastly, and I guess kind of leastly, is going to be the Wookiee team. Overall, not bad, but at the same time, we're relegating them to defense for a reason. They don't really beat all that much, and maybe their actual best use is soaking up Bad Batch, so the Bad Batch can't go and beat something else later on. So that is going to be our ranking for 3v3. Let me know what you guys think. If you'd like to see this as a regular alongside our 5v5 one. Until the next time, stay awesome.